put your syringe on the back end. You just simply open it, flush out the end, turn that off, make sure you're connected with this open, 0. As soon as it's 0, you're going to close that, fix the 0, and now you can go on and off the pressure at will. The system works fantastic, gives you very accurate pressures, it's fast, it's easy to set up, extremely easy to troubleshoot. But it has to physically be at heart level when you're taking your pressure measurement. And if you're taking multiple pressure measurements that you will then want to compare to each other, you have to make sure that you put it back to the same level every time you take a pressure measurement. Because if you're this far off of where you were before, your pressures are going to be off. Now, if there are arterial pressures, it's not nearly as bad. We're talking about venous pressures, little differences make a big difference. So I think that might be what's led you to go to option B. Option B is our compensator version of an integrated transducer. The compensator has a flush port that doesn't come off the top, it actually comes off the bottom. And you connect what we call a compensating line, just a pressure line. So how does this one work different than the other one? This one, when you get ready to 0 it, you're going to flush out this port. You want to flush and fill that entire line with fluid. The purpose of that fluid is simply as a counterbalance. Whenever you're talking about a counterbalance with transducers, you simply are counterbalancing the weight of the fluid at that end to heart level, so that the weight of the fluid that's in the catheter and this line just cancels each other out. That's it. It's an algebraic equation. Once you do to one side, you do to the other, cancels out, and it's meaningless. What's left is the patient's actual pressure. So you have flushed that line. You want to turn this off, leaving your flush 0 port open. Set it down, 0. I say set it down because if you're holding it, moving it around while you're zeroing, it's not going to be good. 0 it. Once you've zeroed, turn your 0 port off. Just don't ever touch it again. There's just no reason to open it. At this point, you can go on and off the pressure at will. Now when I'm on the pressure, unlike this system, it does not matter where my position is. I can have 2 of these at different positions. As long as that end is at the same position, we've fixed it. I think that that's actually a better system for you, especially because I'm told that you actually do use 2 of these on some of your cases. With the old system, they would have to be at the same physical position every time you took pressure measurement. This one, set it up, fix it once, and then this doesn't matter. You know, the chest, between the legs, it can fall off on the side of the patient, doesn't matter. Any questions? Okay, so the next thing I'd like to say is, okay, so how can we screw it up and get some errant pressure readings? Well, this is a common one. Let's say you got a physician that comes in, you've got this all set up, it's ready to go. They want to double check it. So they're going to turn this off, they're not connected to their catheter yet, and they say 0. I want to just go ahead and re-zero. Some people always like to do that, they just re-zero. And they're used to just simply zeroing off the end because, well, I'm open to error here, I should be able to 0. That does work with this style. It does work, it doesn't matter. Because if I'm open here, or if I'm open there, it doesn't make any difference. It's just 2 sides of the same thing. With this one, it makes a big difference. If I'm trying to 0 from this port, I'm not 0'd. Because at this point, this transducer is sensing all the weight of the fluid in this line. So unless these are absolutely at identical level, then you're baking into your 0 either a positive or a negative. So if they do that, they will mess up the 0, thinking that they're just resetting the 0. So don't ever let them do that. If they want to re-zero, then that's fine. Just turn that off and open the 0 port. Re-zero. Another thing, same thing sort of that happens, is that they want to check their 0. They don't want to re-zero, but they want to check it. So they'll open, they're not attached to anything. And they're open and they'll look up and they're thinking, well, this should go back to 0, right? It won't, because it's sensing the weight of the fluid here. And depending on where this is, that line is either going to be above or below your 0 point. So your knowledge of that will help them to understand that that's not how you check zero. If you want to check your zero, make sure you're off here and reopen your 0 point. At that point, it should go back to 0. If it doesn't go back to 0, then just re-zero, close, and you're good to go. A couple other things that I'll point out. This compensator line is there for counterbalance, weight. If you have a little bubble in this line, don't waste 2 seconds on it. As long as the line is generally filled with fluid, you're good to go. This line, unlike a normal pole-mounted transducer, is not transmitting any pressure waveform. So a little bubble is not going to dampen anything. Now, that being said, on the back side here, this little space between the transducer and the stopcock here is always going to be filled with air. Don't try to get it out. You'll never get it out. It's fine. So don't struggle or worry about it. Let's see, what else is pretty much it. Any questions that you guys might have?
Any combinations you see?
What if I had talked to the nurse too, like what if this backs up with blood because it accidentally, opened this up and opened this up this way, and now this has got some patient's blood back in.
Right, that's a great question. If you have blood that's back in that line, then that's usually a key indicator that sometime during the procedure while connected to the patient, whoever was holding it accidentally opened that.
Right.
Maybe they thought that's how they're going to get their pressure. They open it, and if you've got blood that's in here, it's just going to be pushed right on out. So, what do? Well, you close it. Or you can just say, well, let's just re-zero. Then you just flush it out, re-zero, and then close it. So you can clear it out. Just clear it out if you want to.
Doesn't
Although
matter.
it doesn't really matter
It's
because
still
it's just
fluid.
weight.
Yeah, it's still a
Just
fluid
weight.
that's okay.
But if there's blood, you have to re-zero it because you opened it.
I don't know that you have to. If you saw some blood there, that you would have to re-zero. Understand, when you are zeroing the system, you're zeroing it, first and foremost, to atmospheric pressure. So in reality, just to make things a little bit more complex, you don't have to have any fluid in there to zero. You can zero it completely dry and then put the fluid in later. When you're zeroing two things: atmospheric pressure, which is what you do on the system, and hydrostatic pressure, which is the weight of the fluid in the lines. You do that zero by physically ensuring that is at heart level. If during a case, this is of course just a regular pole-mounted transducer, so they fix those at heart level. They usually set it to this port. During a case, while connected to the patient, if you're measuring the pressures, and you actually go over and you physically raise the transducer, their pressure is going to drop. It's not really dropping. It's dropping because the weight of the fluid is actually being, it's a negative to the patient's pressure. So it's a dynamic zero. Hydrostatic is a dynamic zero. It changes when you change things. So, do you have to re-zero? Probably not. Does it hurt? No. It's quick, it's fast.
So when they're not getting accurate pressures with the system, is it a troubleshooting thing with like their catheter and their location? Or because the first thing they do is they blame them.
Yeah. Well, you always want to blame technology first. But understand that when you're getting pressure measurements that seem inaccurate, anything in the system, and of course part of the system is the catheter that's in the patient. You can have a catheter that, while in the patient, actually is kinked in a way that will affect the pressure. You can't see it. And sometimes, I've seen it where something is wrong. Maybe you've been torquing the catheter a lot. You don't realize it, but outside the field of view, you've kinked your catheter. Well, your pressure is going to reflect that. So there's lots of things that can affect that. Of course, the transducer certainly can be bad. It is a man-made problem. I will tell you though, at NAMIC, we test 100% of the transducers that we manufacture. We don't sample batches. We test every single one, and we produce probably about a million plus transducers a year. You can go up to the factory in New York, and you'll see them. They sit there, they plug them in, they do a pressure test to ensure that we don't have a leak, a crack, or something that didn't seal right from a glue perspective. And then they do an electrical test to make sure that electrically the transducer is working. Does not mean that you still can't have a failure. You can, but our failure rate for transducers is probably one of the best that we have for any of the products that we sell, because of the fact that we don't sample them. We test every single one. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
I'm just wondering if our monitor is also a slight, like we were just talking about,
Yeah.
issue in the fact that we're measuring it as an arterial pressure when it's really
Right.
not.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely doing a service to us for sure. But I think, I mean, at least we know now that we should take our arterial alarm off. We're going to ignore that, right? But we have to have the 3 values for each dual pressure.
The only way to do that is, unless you can put it on a CDP, but you have to manually, physically measure it yourself to get those 3 numbers.
Right, and there's
You're not
no
gonna-
way that any of us are going to do that, right? So we have to have our means valued out by assimilation of an arterial line.
Right.
And I do know that you guys are trying to make your scales to simulate that once we come in, but I mean, it's not a terrible thing for if you guys are coming in. So we were talking about teamwork earlier, and some of the technology responsibility can help the nurses. When you come into your patient before you get draped and they're doing their whatever assessments, find your heart, find your zero, put this here for them. Okay, that's gonna help them immensely. And if you are helping them plug in their lines, pay attention to which line is going into P1 and which one is going into P2. And then hand it off to whoever and say, this is CDP, this is gonna be your hepatic pressures. So it just, all this helps consistency and technique. So, and it's reproducible. So if we all do this every single time, then we're being consistent for better numbers. Quality. That's my little spiel.
And while I've got your attention, I never turn down attention. While I've got your attention, I'll mention one other thing. These connectors were designed to be very robust. We designed them because we know that in a cath room or an individual radiology room, this connection may be ran over, may be squished between a bed and a stretcher. You know, we did not want to make this easily breakable. That being said, it may take some force to actually connect it. That's good, because then it should likewise take some force to disconnect it, because you don't want it accidentally disconnected in the case. So one thing to look at, you see on your cable, there is a NAMIC logo. That NAMIC logo, when you actually insert it, the logo should completely disappear. If you can see any part of the logo, it's not pushed in all the way. So push it in all the way. Now, this particular cable, I can tell you've had it for a while. It's not new. New cables that come out are really stiff because it's just come from the manufacturer. And I'll tell you, they're even harder to push in. So if you ever get a new cable, always check, make sure you push it all the way in. And then I always like to, for new cables, I'm going to take that in and I'm just going to sort of like pry it just to loosen it up from the manufacturing process.
Thank you. You guys I mean, to me, it opened up my eyes of what this counterbalance pressure is doing, and I understand how it works now, where before I didn't get it at all. I was like, how does this work? This is magic. Like, this is like, I didn't get it, but I get it now.
That wasn't me.
So,
I do think if we could, nurses and technologists wise, know what cable, what number one is what, like what you're handing off. I
right,
think that's
so
gonna be-
yeah, this is
Sometimes I'm like,
P1, this is
I just sit there and
P2.
look at my monitor. I'm like, well, whatever one opens up first is the one that I'm gonna quick then go and recalibrate that scale
Exactly.
real quick, and I don't know which one they're gonna open up first.
And it all takes time, right? So if the doctors are sitting there tapping their toes, waiting for their first pressure to open, and she's got it zeroed and everything, help your nurse out by identifying what cable you're giving,
Yeah.
hooking up first. And then they know what scale they're looking and what they have to fix. So it's just all, if that teamwork, that one little piece is gonna help them so much.
Sometimes I will see, because it's always, the cables look identical on these ends, I will see folks where they will take a marker and they'll just, on this cap, they'll just label it P1, P2. That way when you're holding this one, you know exactly which one you're about to connect. But,
I feel like that stuff walks all the time,
Yeah.
but just you'd have to train yourself to look and say, this slot is P1 on my monitor. I've got the P1 cable in my hand, you know what I mean? So I just know how our cables look. We've tried labeling
They
things,
move.
we try to do all that stuff, but that stuff always changes, right? So it's just training your eyes to say, oh, this is one cable.
Disregard it.
I mean, yeah, in an ideal world, that would be great.
Right? I hear ya.
Me and Deborah also talked about trying to get this as close to the patient as we can, so we have an accurate.
When you're eyeballing the heart.
We said, like, I brought up, like, you know, the little anesthesia pole.
Yeah.
You can stick right here, and it's right there. We can stick it anywhere. It moves with the patient. So I find sometimes that, you know, that they all work at the head of the bed because we're going by the IJ. So our pole is all way over here. So then we're trying to guess the heart level with the patient draped and not having a clear look of the patient. So we're just sitting there like, I think this is about right. Maybe try to do this before the patient gets draped. So one of the things you should do first. And try to get as close to the patient as you can to make sure this is accurate too, because that can also affect your pressures if this is way up high and actually the normal heart is down here.
Oh yeah, that's, I mean that right there is the most critical setting you make.
Yeah.
Right?
If you're off there, then you know,
Pay your
you may be
attention to
reproducible,
your-
but you're
yeah.
reproducible.
Pay attention
Right.
to your patient's
Personally-
body habitus. Look at where the you should anticipate the heart at the costophrenic angle and measure where you think the heart's going to lead from there along the level of the mid-axillary plane. So